Okay, I have 1 o'clock, so we're going to get started. This is Penny Poley, and I'm the Conservation Planning and Membership Services Manager at Wisconsin Land and Water. So thank you for joining us for the third day of the Conservation Partnership Training. So I think that's about it, and we'll stick to the schedule, and let's hear what Bart has to tell us.
Great, thank you, Penny. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bart Chad. I'm an engineer supervisor. I supervise conservation engineering staff in Juneau and Richland Center. I am also the state drainage engineer. So the Conservation Engineering Unit at the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, commonly referred to as DATCAP, works closely with County Land Conservation Department staff and other conservation professionals. We employ 10 engineers and environmental specialists, and this map shows the 5 conservation engineering field offices and the associated coverage areas. Each office is usually staffed with an agricultural engineer and an environmental specialist, with the exception of our Park Falls office, which only has an agricultural engineer. These offices are often co-located with area NRCS engineering staff, which allows for good communication and collaboration with our conservation partners. On any given day, our field staff can be anywhere in their areas, working directly with landowners or providing technical assistance to LCD and NRCS staff. County LCD staff provide the primary technical support to our landowners for planning and designing and constructing conservation practices, such as manure storage facilities, roof and barnyard runoff control systems, milking center waste systems, and other BMP best management practices. So this is the field office technical guide. This is an NRCS website and often called the FOTOG. We have national standards that are developed for conservation practices. Each state then modifies these practices to best suit their states for site-specific. So if we go to the FOTOG and we choose Wisconsin and we submit it, it'll pull up the list of conservation practices for the state of Wisconsin. They're located under Section 4, and here the conservation practice standards and support documents. Here you can see the list of all the conservation practices that we have standards developed for. And so this provides the standard itself and the supporting documentation. So if we click on Access Road, you can see here's the conservation practice standard, acronyms everywhere in our industry, as all of you know, so CPS. SOW is scope of work, and then supporting documentations as well. If we pull up one of the standards, the Access Road in this case, it will show the format of the standard and how they are written. So here you can see this is for the state of Wisconsin, conservation practice standard, access road. The code is the 560, CPS 560. It also shows the unit in which this conservation practice pay schedule is. Each of these standards are in the exact same format. They definition, purpose, condition where the practice applies, and then the criterias for each of the standards: location, alignment, width of the road, the side slopes, the drainage, shows you the design frequencies that are required, type of surfacing, surfacing cross sections per soil type, soil classifications, shows spacing for cross drains along the road, identifies safety and erosion control, other considerations, the plans and specifications that are required, the operation and maintenance for the standard, and of course it ends with the references to where you can find the governing equation and the technical analysis and methodologies that are used for that standard. So DATCAP engineers' roles is to help local staff design and install conservation practices and to provide them with training. And so our engineers and our specialists assists the county LCD staff with design, plan review, development and maintenance of BMPs, development of computer aid design spreadsheets, assistance with construction oversight. And by providing this training and this technical assistance, the goal is a transfer of knowledge. And so that's intended to provide each of our individuals in our counties with the skills necessary to become certified conservation engineering practitioners. So I'd like to briefly describe some of the elements of the certification program today, and just basically provide you with an introduction to this very integral part of Wisconsin conservation. So first is the distinction between engineered and non-engineered practices. And loosely defined, engineering is a branch of science and technology that's concerned with the design, the building, and the use of structures. Again, such as manure storage, runoff control systems, heavy use areas and filter strips, water and sediment control basins, or what we call WASCOBs, stream bank protection, access roads, and stream crossings for livestock and equipment. So in a nutshell, engineering certification program allows non-engineers to do engineering work. And this, of course, is based on skills and the demonstrated proficiency of the practitioner in the planning, designing, and constructing of these practices. And this authority comes from the state soil and water conservation engineer. And for DATCAP, that's Matt Woodrow, who is my supervisor. And through that, he delegates to our area engineers who monitor and administer the certification program to the county LCD staff within their area. The certification program was initiated in 1991 when the Wisconsin legislature passed and enacted Act 309. And it basically set the goals of the program to, again, allow and enable county and state employees to perform engineering work without a license, promoting uniformity and quality assurance and continuity for our conservation practices throughout the state. Chapter 92 of the Wisconsin statute provides the requirements and legal framework for the implementation of conservation work in Wisconsin, and ATCP 50 is the administrative rules that details the procedures of the work, and it also includes the engineering practitioner program. So this is chapter 92 of the Wisconsin statutes. It's our soil and water conservation and animal waste management statute. Provides the legal framework. And this is ATCP 50. This is where you're going to find the details of the conservation engineering practitioner program. Subchapter 8 identifies, again, a lot of our conservation practices that are eligible for cost sharing through our SWARM grants, our soil and water resource management grants. That grant program is also identified here in ATCP 50, and subchapter 6 identifies the soil and water professionals, and that includes our conservation engineering practitioner, which we're talking about now. It also identifies nutrient management planners, soil and manure testing laboratories, and it identifies the procedures and details for training for county staff. So for further details at our 10-minute summary today of this program, if you want to look more in depth, ATCP 50.46 identifies our conservation engineering program. We keep track of all of our staff, both current and former, throughout the state that are within the conservation's certification program. Each of these, we have everyone entered into our system, and this is where we track certification for each of our each individual in here. This is Drew Zell. He is one of our long-term environmental specialists up in the Appleton office. Some of you may know him. So this identifies conservation practice. It talks about what discipline is the lead discipline, and in this database they're mostly engineering. It talks about the controlling factor, and for our access road we have two controlling factors. One is the surface material, one is the length. And then we have the units, of course. Surfacing material would be the type of material, and the length would be in feet, and those would be the controlling factor with its units. Then we have our job class certification. At what level can our practitioners perform work individually? And so, for example, on the access road in length and units in feet, the job classes are 1,500 feet, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 feet. And those identify the job class certifications for that particular implementation of that practice. And you can see here, Drew has very high levels of certification. He's been in this position for over 20 plus years and has gained a lot of experience and knowledge. So he has a lot of class 4s and 5s. He's one of our senior people in the state. And so as I click through these lists on this report, it shows all the conservation practices and all the authorities that Drew has for planning, design, and construction of each of these conservation practices based on their controlling factors. And so this lists all the NRCS conservation practice standards and all the levels of authority that Drew has to work on these practices. So this is an extension of the NRCS job approval authority. The state legislature and DACAP used the job approval authority of NRCS to develop our program, our certification program. I'm not going to talk about the job approval of NRCS. You'll get that from NRCS in a different talk, or as you progress in your careers, you'll see it's basically a parallel program with some subtle differences that we've had to separate. A lot of it comes down to, is it a federal funded job or is it a state funded job, and some other subtleties. But again, it's an exemption from engineering licensure. And so it's to establish and maintain those certification levels in order for each technician to plan, design, and construct conservation practices. How to obtain certification is working directly with your area engineer. So each of our DACAP engineers in your particular area will be the ones to monitor and to administer the program. Again, it comes down to the demonstrated knowledge, your training, your experience in, and your proficiency as you do more and more of these practices and becoming more and more comfortable with each element of the design and implementation of these practices. But the key is work with your area engineer in developing your skill set and increasing your certification levels. DACAP also has a training oversight requirement. Again, in ATCP 5052 identifies the specifics of that, and it's basically to identify, recommend, and deliver trainings to our conservation partners in order to transfer that knowledge and develop your certification levels so that you can then do this work on your own. It also establishes a training advisory committee, which is currently overseen by Wisconsin Land and Water. It's called SITCOM. It's the State Interagency Training Committee, and includes our conservation partners, along with some of our county conservation department staff as well. There is a continuing education requirement. This comes directly from professional engineering. We are required as PEs to obtain 30 PDHs of continuing training every 3 years. And so this is transferred directly to our certification program. So PDHs, that's 10 every year. They come from one-on-one trainings, planned classroom trainings, and a lot of the trainings that you are going to be involved with. It also has to be documented. So each individual is responsible for documenting their training record, dates, type of training, sponsor, number of PDHs, and so on. So keep in mind today there are continuing education units available, but CEUs are not equivalent to PDHs. And so a PDH, the best analogy is here. So if we had a general Microsoft Excel training, that would not be professional development hours. But if you used an Excel spreadsheet that was a macro, that was a design spreadsheet to help us design the dimensions and capacity and the materials for a waste storage facility, then that type of training would be considered professional development. There's at least, you have to have at least 50 minutes of training qualifies for one professional development hour. And again, use your judgment, work with your colleagues and our area engineers to determine those trainings. The record of the trainings will be requested when a practitioner, we do spot checks to make sure that people are getting their professional development hours. Our engineers do spot checks as they work with you in partnership. And they may also require that record when we go to increase your certification levels or renew your certification on that 3-year cycle. So that's a quick overview of the Conservation Engineering Practitioner Program for DATCAP. And again, just remember, ATCP 50 identifies the specifics of it, and of course our conservation engineering webpage has all of the links and all the information that you might need.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Bart.
Excellent.
That was good. Very
Excellent.
good.
You're welcome.
To hear
very good
about Drew, what he's all up to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And welcome to the Wisconsin Conservation, everyone.
Yes. Great. Okay. I am going to make Susan the presenter and get her going. Thanks again, Bart. That was interesting.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay, I think let's get started. We got most of the people back. So Marty, let's take it away.
All righty. Thank you very much, Penny, for inviting me back on. And everyone, great to have you all listening in. So as Penny said, my name is Marty Moses. I'm the state coordinator for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever here in Wisconsin. We are two sister organizations. Our Quail Forever organization is a little more prevalent in the southern part of the United States. But up here, we're more of a Pheasants Forever chapter-driven organization. And right off the bat, I'd like to acknowledge our two main partners, the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, the NRCS, and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. They are very pivotal in our ability to do the work that we do here in Wisconsin. And most of what I'll be talking about today is a resource for all of you conservation professionals, is our Farm Bill Biologist program. So just real quick, so everyone gets a flavor of our mission, we are dedicated to the conservation of pheasants, quail, and other wildlife through habitat improvements, public awareness, education, and land management policies and programs. And I'll touch a little bit on all of these as I discuss our organization. As I mentioned, our bread and butter and kind of the resource that will be most valuable to all of you is the Farm Bill Biologist program. And here in the center is our map of coverage. Each of the white stars indicates where our 7 Farm Bill biologists sit, and they are located in NRCS field offices or area offices, and they cover multiple counties. They work out of multiple field offices, and they are experts in all things NRCS and DNR program related as it connects to private landowners. We also have a fellow named Scott, and he's located up in Eau Claire County, but covers the greater northwest portion of the state. I recently acquired 2 new grants that will be bringing on some additional positions later this fall that will have a precision ag specialist for the southeast corner of the state, and we will also be bringing on a wetland easement specialist. But I've shared this map with all of our contact information to Penny, and so it will be available to you on the resource document that she's sharing with everyone. As I mentioned, our team is very well versed in the Farm Bill programs, CRP, EQIP, CSP, ASAP, which is the easement programs, and the RCPP program is another realm that we're able to dabble in. So I know some of you maybe are familiar with these and some of you are perhaps not, or you're new to this alphabet soup. So I'll give a quick crash course and a kind of reminder of what all these programs are. The CRP is a rental payment that provides annual rentals to farmers to take highly sensitive land out of production and put it into a perennial cover, whether it's an introduced grass or a pollinator planting of a high diverse flower mixture. EQIP is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and that provides financial and technical assistance to ag producers to help them on their working lands address natural resource concerns, issues that need to be rectified, such as erosion or degraded wildlife habitat or soil health concerns. And the CSP program, Conservation Stewardship Program, is sort of a rewarding folks for doing good things and helping them to continue to do good things and kind of go above and beyond. So it's not necessarily needing to address a resource concern, but truly enhance the operation that a landowner has. The easement programs mostly are encompassed by the Wetland Reserve Easement program, or the Wetland Reserve Easements. This provides technical and financial assistance for permanently protecting agricultural land that was formerly wetlands. And so obviously, as the name implies, it's specific to only restoring wetlands and their immediate kind of prairie habitat that would have been surrounding that wetland. In Wisconsin, we do have nearly 700 wetland easements all throughout the state. You see here the red dots indicate the general location. And this totals almost 70,000 acres of wetlands that have been restored and permanently protected through the wetland easement programs. Our team, I should kind of double back, our team also started in 2007, so we've been on the ground for almost 13 years now, and we started off as very specific, only working on the wetland easements, and since then we've grown from, I think we started with 2 biologists working only on easements to now, as you saw, we've got 8 biologists scattered around the state, and we're working on all the programs that the NRCS has to offer. In addition to the Farm Bill programs from the NRCS, we also help the DNR deliver some of their private land specific programs. Of those is the Voluntary Public Access Program, or the VPA program. We also can help folks kind of navigate and get connected with the Deer Management Assistance Program, or DMAP. Our biologists, our team works very close with the Fish and Wildlife Service and their partners program, so we can help connect dots there. And then throughout the state, we've got 31 chapters of Pheasants Forever that can also help deliver programs, whether it's through on-the-ground manpower or perhaps providing additional financial incentives. And then we do work very close with the land conservation departments, other conservation organizations and nonprofits. The Farm Service Agency we also work with in terms of processing the CRP programs. This is what we call our impact map, and if you look at the top, this is our calendar year 2019 work that we delivered. And so you can see the color-coded pinpoints around the state that indicate different habitat type projects that our team has worked on relative to the stars, which are the location of our Farm Bill biologists. And you can see that they do cluster, our projects tend to cluster around the home office of where our biologists are located, but we do get around the state pretty well. A new area that we're starting to grow, I mentioned it in that intro slide of the team, is this precision agriculture approach, and kind of looking at it in a different viewpoint from simply going out and looking for natural resource concerns or habitat deficiencies. This approach works with the farmer kind of much more closely and really is looking at the profit margins and the bottom line of working lands. And our goal is to keep working lands working and we really operate under the slogan of farm the best and conserve the rest. And so this kind of takes on a new slant. We do engage with the Farm Bill programs, EQIP especially, but CRP and CREP as well. And kind of this map provides a good example of the approach that we look at. On the left-hand side, you can see what a typical farm, and this is a real-world example up in Dunn County. This gentleman has been farming this property. You can see all the green and yellow acres relative to that percent return on investment. So think about the inputs that it takes for a average farmer to farm any field. You know, you've got equipment costs, gasoline costs, you've got herbicides, you've got nutrients, you've got seed costs, all the things, the inputs that it would take, including the farmer's time, quite frankly. And then you look at the average yield that gets pulled off of that field relative to what the commodity prices are at the time, and you're able to calculate a return on the investment. So what, how much are they truly making off that land, regardless of how many bushels they're pulling off. So you see the red pixels on that picture in the left are locations where there's a negative return on investment, yet the farmers tend to continue to farm those areas because it's, whether it's easier or it's just always what's been done. Historically, farmers know that they're not going to yield as much off of those areas, but oftentimes we find they're maybe not completely understanding the true dollar loss that's occurring on those. And so we're able to use a variety of different software packages and provide these sorts of maps that show the actual return on investment and the dollars lost. If you look on the right-hand side, that finger that points off to the east down along the Hay River is a floodplain. And so that field would get flooded out even though corn was planted. And so there would be constantly a negative return in those areas. We worked with this farmer and he enrolled that area into CREP. And so it took a portion of the field out of production. He is getting a rental payment from that CREP. But if you look at the bottom, on average now, simply taking that bright red area out of his work zone, he's no longer putting dollars into the ground there. It has increased his profit, increased his return on investment, and he is still boosted his overall field average yield. So these are the kinds of tools that we start to work with farmers on working land and trying to help them stay viable, especially in this tough economic time. Our goal is to establish perennial cover whenever possible. And that can be anything from just simply a grass filter strip to pollinator strips. You've maybe been hearing about the prairie strips that folks are starting to implement. We also help farmers think about and where to locate those so that we're putting them on the red acres and not simply cutting across the field and perhaps cutting into the good green acres. Often it's field edges along tree lines that get shaded or perhaps get heavily browsed by deer that are starting to come out of those wood lines. So we're finding opportunities to take those out, put them into hay, put them into grass. It's still something that the farmer can cut and still use, perhaps if he's got livestock, or he can sell it or barter with a neighbor. And then we start to incorporate a lot more cover crops into the infield work that a farmer is using. And we're trying to push the envelope as much as comfortably possible and start to get those high diverse cocktail cover crop mixes out there. We are also able to work with the farmer to look at variable rate seedings, variable rate fertilizer, or variable rate herbicide applications and things like that. So you might be asking yourself, why pheasants? Why pheasants forever? Why are we in this game? Pheasants, all things admitted, is a non-native bird to North America. However, pheasants do serve as a very excellent umbrella management species, where we find that what's good for a pheasant is often good for many other wildlife species. And fortunately, pheasants are not competing for habitat space with any significant other wildlife species. So they fill a habitat void, and they provide an opportunity to create habitat for many other species. To date, over the 13 years that we've been working in Wisconsin, we've impacted over 90,000 acres, worked with 11,000 landowners, and have reached over 2,000 people through workshops. As I mentioned, umbrella species and what's good for a pheasant is good for others. Take, for instance, nesting cover. Pheasants really prefer to have tall, warm season grasses that can provide that overhead cover from, say, hawks and things like that, and horizontal cover, so relatively thick, that will provide concealment from ground predators like raccoons and foxes that are really out looking for eggs to steal. Well, that habitat just happens to be very excellent for grassland nesting birds and waterfowl as well. Brood rearing cover, or the locations where hen pheasants like to raise their chicks, that often will coincide with diverse forb mixes, and forbs is another word for flowers. And so that these areas tend to be excellent pollinator patches as well. And then finally, the winter cover that a pheasant requires to survive through the year provides thermal protection and oftentimes is associated with wetlands and cattail marshes because they're strong, stiff stems, they stand up to snow and ice, and this also makes really good habitat for white-tailed deer to be able to survive through the winter. Beyond our Farm Bill Biologist team and what we do at a greater kind of national scale is a lot of legislative advocacy. So we are proponents of strong conservation provisions associated with the Farm Bill and many other state and national policies. Our 30-some chapters implement a variety of outreach events, youth pollinator days. They often can be partnered with to co-sponsor various workshops. We often have chapters that have crews that can get out and do burns, whether it's on public or private land, potentially for hire. And then I mentioned that our chapters often have some additional funds that they can offer to offset the cost of, say, very diverse seed mix that is trying to enhance pollinator habitat. This is simply a map showing the location of our 30-some chapters throughout the state. Another area that we work on, or that I especially focus on, is R3, or the recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters and anglers, simply because there's a nationwide trend of declining participation rates, and the dollars spent by hunters and anglers, whether it's buying their licenses and their stamps, or even their hunting equipment, their firearms and their ammunition, all creates a funding source that comes back to the states that helps us manage wildlife, public lands, and supports conservation at a local level. Our chapters and our Farm Bill biologists engage in a variety of outreach events and conferences. One of the outreach events that we've been especially excited about and are excited to see it growing are the Women Caring for the Land events, where we've partnered with the Wisconsin Farmers Union, MOSES, which stands for the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, the Farm Service Agency, and the NRCS, to host women-specific outreach events to help women landowners, whether they're operators or non-operators, understand more about the conservation programs that are available to them. And we create a space for for women to gather where it's only women. Men typically are not invited to these, so that there's a open floor and learning circle kind of atmosphere. And fortunately, of the 7 Farm Bill biologists that we have on our staff, 5 of them are women and scattered around the state, so they are co-leading many of these. And that is my quick whirlwind tour of what Pheasants Forever is here in Wisconsin. And feel free to jot down my email there and follow up if you've got something that comes up down the road, or if you've got an immediate question you just prefer to ask me offline.
Thanks everyone for again coming back on. Marty, thanks for bearing with us. Well, I had a little technical problems there, but time that we switch over to Nate.
Thank you everyone for having me. I am Nate Walker. I'm the Habitat and Outdoor Recreation Team Coordinator for the DNR Waterways Bureau. I have been with DNR for about a year and a quarter or so. Came back to DNR after some years of living in Nebraska. And I'm glad to be back here in the state working for an agency that I very much appreciate. So thank you for the time, and I will try to make this a little quick if I can, but feel free to ask questions. So Penny, if you'll jump to the second slide, we got the Wisconsin Public Trust Doctrine, the basis for regulation. I wanted to go through some of the history just to kind of back up so everybody was on the same page. So next slide. The origin of water law in Wisconsin goes back as far as the Northwest Ordinance from 1787. So long before Wisconsin even was a state. And the key phrase as part of it, you may have heard it before if you've interacted with folks in the water program, water reg program, that the waterways shall be common highways and forever free. So that was incorporated into the state constitution when Wisconsin was basically born in 1848. So there's a whole lot of history that goes into this. So Penny, if you can go to the then and now. So navigation, fishing, use of wildlife habitat, things like that are public values and public uses of our public waterways. And my program within DNR is a significant portion of it is to make sure that the public trust is protected. And you can see here there's been case law going back to the 1870s when various generally clubs you know, tried to privatize public waterways, and the common highways and forever free was upheld time and time again. So I wanted to talk a little bit about navigability because that is one I think that gets a little bit tricky for folks, and it's key to Chapter 30 of the Wisconsin State Statutes. That is what our program and water reg regulates is navigable waterways. So the key to navigability is defined bed and banks and the ability to float a recreational watercraft. And it's clearly defining that has been somewhat elusive, but it's one of those situations where if at some point during the year it can float a lightweight watercraft like a canoe, small canoe or kayak, assume that it's navigable and seek out a permit or seek out input from a water management specialist to help guide whether indeed that is navigable. If you have questions about navigability, you have a few resources at your disposal. On the DNR website, we have the DNR Surface Water Data Viewer. If any of you haven't used that in the past, it is a complex tool at times, but it is a really helpful tool. And I've got the link on here, Surface Water Data Viewer. If you search that on the DNR website, you'll be able to pull that up. You can use USGS topo maps. You can contact a water management specialist directly, and you can do a contact search on the DNR website as well from the link that I provided. And if you, in the subject box, if you put in water management specialist and the county that you want, it will give you a series of names for the water management specialist that covers that area. And there's also a fact sheet that gives some good tips and tricks on navigation and public access. So you can follow the link in the slide to that as well. So I've got a couple examples, if you can go to the next slide, Penny, of bed and banks. So when we look, these are pretty obvious examples, I would say, but just to demonstrate what we're working with here, when we're looking at a stream, we're looking for a clear differentiation between the banks on the side of the stream and the bed itself. And in some situations, you get into flowing water that doesn't clearly have those bed and banks, you may not have a navigable water body. So if you jump to the next slide, slide 2 on bed and banks, again, we look at the, in this instance, a gravel, rocky bottom in the stream course, and at some point that vegetation stops. That is where we define an ordinary high water mark and call that the bank on the edges, but the bank holding that stream in between the banks. All right, if you can go to the next slide, Envision at high water. As I just talked about the ordinary high water mark, below the ordinary high water mark is where the public access and the public trust is regulated. So if you're above that ordinary high water mark, you have a lot more latitude than you do below it. But if you want to do something below the ordinary high water mark of a navigable water body, you need to seek out input and usually a permit from the DNR. So as I talked about in the last slide, you can see a point generally on the bank where the vegetation begins to grow. And just below that is where we often define the ordinary high water mark. We look at a variety of items, not just vegetation. You can often get staining on trees, a variety of key things that catch your eye. And when it comes to navigability and a recreational user on that water body, you probably have heard, you're able to navigate, and if you encounter some kind of obstruction to navigation, the advice is to get out, portage around it in the shortest way possible, and then get back into the water body to continue navigation. If you can go to the next one, distance and continuity. As we talk about navigability and use of a watercraft, in this instance, a turn that is too tight for a watercraft to make is not necessarily going to make that a non-navigable water body. And there's not a distance required. It's just this stretch of the stream becomes navigable. It doesn't have to be this 50 feet or more for that stream course to be navigable. So often, more than anything, I'd say this relates to where can I fish? So if you're looking for information on where, public access, fishing, things like that, there is a variety of resources at your disposal. Going from that surface water data viewer, which will show public lands and a variety of other things like the Wisconsin Atlas and Gazetteer, public access land viewer on the DNR website. You can use the Hunt Wild app through DNR, or if you really have questions and you're not getting satisfaction with those tools, you can contact DNR fisheries staff and they will give you some really good information. So the next slide, go to access and trespass. Easiest thing to do is to ask permission. We have encountered many sticky situations where whether or not it's public or private gets dicey, and it's clear to one person and it's not necessarily clear to everyone. So the easiest thing to start with is ask permission if you'd like to go access a water body. Bridges, a lot of people will often access for canoeing, kayaking, things like that. On a bridge, you need to make sure that you're being covered there by accessing within the right-of-way. It doesn't give you the opportunity or doesn't give you the legal access of someone else's property to get to it necessarily. You have to go from a legal right-of-way into the water body. And then keep your feet wet. That's the safest way to be in public access where it's legal and you don't have issues. Again, obstructions, you can portage around them. If you can stay below the ordinary high water mark, that's the best option. The other guidance that you'll often hear from wardens and others is shortest method around an obstruction is the best way. All right, I talked about ordinary high water mark. I'm going to skip over the links and contacts. If you've got my presentation, Penny, you can just leave that for folks. If you want to learn more, there are resources out there. Champions of the Public Trust is an older video that explains the history of regulatory law in Wisconsin as it relates to waterways. And it's for some interesting history lessons if you're ever curious. But there's some good opportunities to figure out where and what water bodies you can enjoy in the state. So next slide, I'm going to jump over to wetland regulations. That's another one that many of you will have some kind of intersection with within your job duties. We've got a few that override or that kind of we have to work within here in the state. Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. It's implemented by the Corps of Engineers. We work closely with the Corps of Engineers to verify that wetland rules are being followed at the state and federal level. So when you submit a permit application to DNR, that gets forwarded on to the Corps of Engineers as well for their review, and subsequently you'll often see a response letter from them, or you will see some kind of letter indicating whether your activity is a regulated activity from the Corps' perspective. In the 1980s, we had NR 15 and or 115 and 117 that came along with shoreland and wetland regulations. As time went on, wetland water quality standards came into law in 1991, and in 2012, Chapter 281.36 of the Wisconsin statutes basically laid out the statutory standards for wetland permitting. So when we reference the wetland rules, we go straight to 281.36. And then in 2017, we had Act 183 that created some exemptions for non-federal and artificial wetlands in state law. All right, so that's kind of the history overview. I wanted to dive into a little bit of program updates within what's historically been known as Water Reg. We made a change last year due to kind of a long-standing bit of discontent with the Water Reg program. There's been some changes over time that had been made, and this specialization effort was in response to some of that. So Penny, if you'll go forward. So what we sought to do in mid-year last year was to make an attempt to what we call specialize, which is we now have, instead of a WMS or water management specialist covering a few counties, but covering the entire width and breadth of our permitting, our permits that we have available, and having a broad range of job duties, we sought to use specific expertise to specialize this program and basically work more in our strengths. So for example, my team is the Habitat and Outdoor Recreation team. My background is as a wildlife biologist with some wetland restoration background and history, where now in this team, I can use that restoration background to hopefully help make for a more efficient process and a better end product. So I have a smaller group of permits that I handle in my team. We have a larger geography as a part of that. So Penny, what slide are you on now?
I'm on the one that said meet our teams, and it had the waterway and your habitat.
Great.
That one. Yep.
Excellent. So yes, Habitat and Outdoor Recreation, we have the waterway team, compliance team, the tech and support team, and the wetland team. The ones that you will probably interact with most within the Waterways Bureau would be my Habitat and Outdoor Recreation team. If you have recreational trail projects, if you have public boat ramps, if you have wetland restorations or stream habitat projects, that comes through my team. If you have some kind of a pier, a dredging, those kinds of projects, those could go through the waterway team. And the wetland team does a lot of municipal, private, and commercial wetland fills associated with industry and commerce. And then if our compliance team is interested in permit compliance, and they handle and review violations as well. And the tech and support team is basically to kind of support all of the other teams in terms of our online presence on our website and having the right tools that we need to do our jobs and do them efficiently. So if we jump quick to the Habitat team, I mentioned the Habitat project, some of the recreation projects, water quality trading and adaptive management projects. I spoke with a consultant about one of these even today. Forestry projects like temporary stream crossings. If you work in county forestry department, those permits come through my team. We also support our wetland mitigation staff in doing site reviews of wetland mitigation banks around the state. And then we're starting to work into the role of becoming the outreach and education hub for this program. And ultimately, the hope would be, when we are in a non-COVID-19 world, that we can meet with some of you out on site and talk through a variety of your projects, talk through details, and really help with some discussion of the designs and best practices to make those projects as successful as possible, and hopefully help you streamline the permitting process so you know what you're applying for and you can crank it through when it's time to apply. All right, team priorities. So like I said, project consultation is a big part of what we are trying to do. Right now, we're trying to figure out a way to do it digitally, which is requiring a little bit more lean on the applicant. So in your county settings, perhaps, I'm going to be asking for more photos than I would otherwise, so that I can really get a view and an understanding of the landscape that we're seeking to improve with some project. And then, like I said, we're doing training, outreach, and learning opportunities like this one today and others, trying to set up some training videos and record those so that we can help people better understand how to navigate our process. All right, why don't we jump into part 3? I wanted to just go through some permits. If you haven't encountered these yet, I hope this is somewhat enlightening. We have some that are more specific to government agencies that I think could help you if you're looking to do some habitat projects on your landscapes. So if you jump over to that, we're going to start with GP15, stream habitat projects designed by government agencies. And it is the purpose of these projects are to place some kind of structure to improve fish and wildlife habitat. It needs to be designed by DNR, NRCS, Fish and Wildlife Service, or county LCDs or other government agencies. If you do the design for that, there are a variety of things that would include. We get a lot of these that are fish habitat projects. We get a few of these that come in for situations where you got a flooding event and it rechannelized a stream. So we can use this to recreate the thalweg in a stream when we've had something that has been dramatically altered by a storm event. We've done some fords associated with some of these, if it's part of a habitat project. And then there is some wetland disturbance that is associated with these that can be up to 10,000 square feet. So there's a lot of potential use out of these GP15. If any of you are familiar with the integrated bank treatment permit and have done any of those, GP15 is very similar in that it can add a little bit of riprap in a project if it's associated with a habitat as well, and it doesn't have the native species requirement that the integrated bank treatment does. So depending on your situation, this permit or the integrated bank treatment could work in either of those situations. The other one that I see a lot with county staff is GP18 for water quality conservation activities. And a lot of these come in as grassed waterways, grade stabilizations, or some kind of small water control structure. It's associated with improving water quality, and I get a lot of these that are, head cutting gullies, and this is a good way to basically flatten those things out so they stop head cutting, and hopefully flow water better than they had in the past. Again, it's a DNR, LCD, NRCS, Fish and Wildlife Service, or DATCAP. The caveat with this is that they can't negatively impact a cold water community. So if you're dealing with this around trout water, just be cautious and let's review a project to make sure that you're not having a negative impact. Other permits that you might encounter at the county levels, clear span bridges. I talked to a lot of folks from counties about trail systems or parks situations where there's a walking trail and a bridge replacement, either due to flooding or due to a long-standing bridge. We're hoping to be updating this permit in the near future to simplify our waterway crossings. And that has been, I would say, a significant opportunity within this specialization model, is that we have sought many different ways to make our process much more efficient and simple. So the example in our crossings, waterway crossings, general permit that we're hoping to come out with in the next year, we're going to be looking at, instead of 18 eligibility requirements, taking that down to 7, I believe, or possibly 8. So it's just a much clearer way to figure out if your project is eligible for a general permit. Boat ramp general permit is another one I see a lot, where you have an old boat ramp, existing boat ramp, or you want to install a new one. Those boat ramp general permits, if it fits in the eligibility criteria, they come through us quite a bit. The Ford general permits is another one. That is the standalone general permit, but they could also be done through GP15 and GP18. Again, another thing we're trying to simplify in the coming year with the crossings general permit, because 3 different ways to complete a Ford just seems to be convoluted. And then the big one I do a fair amount of is the wetland restoration general permit. We have a federal version for NRCS and Fish and Wildlife Service, and non-federal for everybody else. And then basically you can do tile breaks, ditch fills, wetland scrapes, and the like. I wanted to quick touch on the ePermitting system. That is one that a fair number of people struggle with. If you've done it more than once, it gets easier after you get used to it a little bit. We do have a lot of one-time permit seekers, and they struggle with it. So I wanted to just give some tips. So some of these permits, this is where the eligibility criteria come in. If you can find the checklist, or you can find the information on our website, the habitat, stream habitat permits need to be approved by the DNR fisheries biologist before applying. And we basically just need an application, in the application, an email from them saying, yes, I approve of the plan set, and they need to just have some familiarity with it and give you a thumbs up. Application forms, we've got applicable fees. There was one thing I just wanted to quick touch on, and we're trying to make this more efficient too. Waterway projects with state and federal funding are fee exempt. Wetland projects are a little trickier. They need to be conducted by an agency for the fee exemption to apply. So there's a little bit of a different standard there. Waterway permits being $303 for a general permit, and wetland general permits being $500. We do encounter this a lot where there's some confusion between whether it's a waterway permit or a wetland permit, and whether the fee exemption applies. So just know that that exists. If you have questions, feel free to ask either myself or your water management specialist. Documentation of ownership, good photos makes a huge difference, especially now in a COVID-19 world. So you will save yourself time having to go out there a second time by taking, a fair number of good pictures that help us understand the site and the project, what you're trying to do. Also, good site maps help as well. We get a fair number of site maps that are close in aerial shots. And while those are helpful, I need to figure out how to find the property, and site maps can be really helpful at trying to explain that, but bad site maps don't help, and I often ask for questions. Okay, so the second tips for applying on the ePermitting system, the ESNARI designation is a trigger point for a lot of our permits. There are many exemptions that are either you're eligible for or ineligible for based on whether the water that you're working on is an ESNARI water. So it's a natural resource interest water. Trout water, trout streams, class 1 or 2, I think class 3 as well, have that ESNARI designation, and are going to require a permit, where in a non-ESNARI water you might be eligible for an exemption. Plans and specifications. One thing that saves us a lot of time is calculating square footage of wetland impact if you have impact associated with it. And then what I often tell people is, especially on a habitat project, you might be thinking, we're going to do as many as 50 root wads in a stream over a course of a quarter mile. I like a general map of where they might go, and I like to know the maximum that you'll do. If you do less than that, it's certainly okay. You're not required to. I do get some folks that, they're going to let site conditions dictate whether they put a root wad, in one spot or put it 5 feet away. I'm not that specific. Oftentimes, if you meet these two criteria, it will also help, because the Corps will get a little picky from time to time and really want to know where everything's going to be. So if you have most of this information, that should satisfy their needs as well. Specifics in the narrative are really helpful. If you tell us in your narrative that you're going to put in some fish habitat in a stream, our first questions are going to be, how many structures, what kind of structures, where are they going to be, things like that you can lay out in the narrative that really help us, so that we don't have to put an application on hold and ask for those questions. That just takes extra steps and more time. If you choose, you can do an endangered and threatened species review. There's a public portal on the DNR website that you can see if you have any NI hits on or near your project area, and that will help us. If we see that come in and it says no additional recommendations all the way across, it's pretty straightforward, because NHI hits is one of the main things that we are doing in our review as we review project areas. And then I was going to also mention, once a completed package has been received by permit intake staff, we've got a 30-day review window for the general permits. It's up to 120 days on an individual permit. But if, like I said before, if clarification is needed, we are statutorily, we get one opportunity to ask for more information. And so if we need to ask for clearer photos or more detailed plans, it's just something that takes more time on the back end. So like I say, good info on the front end will save you time on the back end. General questions. We have a call intake line that we also instituted last year when we specialized. So if you use this 608-267-3125 and you leave a message if we're not available with a call intake line for questions like, does this require a permit? What kind of permit should I apply for? You know, just kind of generic questions. The call intake staff are really good at answering those questions. You can also email this DNR WMS public inquiry email address. And then if it is a question they can't answer, if it's more project specific, they will send that to a specialist for a response, and then we get basically an email notification that says we need to follow up and reach out to you for a response. So I will leave it at that, and I don't know if we have time for questions. I'll leave that to you, Penny.
Hey, okay. Kevin is ready to go, but we do have one question. If you could answer it quickly, and then we'll go on to Kevin. She asked, did I hear correctly that you said above the ordinary high water mark, you do not need a permit? If so, does this apply to individual landowners? So the OHWM is the boundary if you are on a river, a lake, a navigable body. Does that make sense?
So I will use the perennial government answer of it depends, only because above the ordinary high water mark, more than likely you're not going to need a water body Chapter 30 permit. You may need a wetland permit under that 28136 state statutes, depending on whether there's floodplain, wetland, and we do have some concern on the bank leading down to the water body. So there's a variety of rules that can complicate that a little bit, but our Chapter 30 authority is mainly going to stop at that ordinary high water mark. Above that, we do regulate it under grading if you have more than 10,000 square feet of grading. But yeah, if you've got a project and you're more than 500 feet from a navigable waterway, and you know Chapter 30 has no regulatory authority beyond 500 feet from a navigable water body, and if you're not in a wetland, then your project has no permit required. It's probably clear as mud.
Well, if it isn't clear enough, you gave your contact information, she can contact you. Okay?
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks much, Nate. Have a good rest of your day. And I am trying to get Kevin Erb. We'll get him going next.
Yep, I am here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kevin Erb, Director of Extension's Conservation Professional Development and Training Program, based up in Green Bay. As I like to say, currently based in my bedroom, but usually at the Brown County Extension Office is where I'm at. And the Conservation Professional Training Program, we've actually been around since 2003. The idea is that we are bringing together professional development and training, kind of coordinating things originally across 6 states in the upper Midwest. We have a significant Wisconsin focus, but we also do training nationwide for NRCS, for Farm Service Agency, for TSPs, Conservation Advisors, Soil and Water Conservation Districts, NGOs like Pheasants Forever, Trout Unlimited, as well as the for-hire manure applicators as well. And so we cover a wide range of trainings, and we do it in a lot of different ways. And so typically pre-COVID, we did a whole lot of face-to-face and field trainings. Those we've scaled back on, but we actually started offering remote and online trainings actually back in 2009. But the idea here is that everybody's budgets are tight, and so we tend to go with a blended hybrid training a lot of times, to where We cover what we can online in things like this, so that when you do spend a day in the field instead of 2 days, you don't have the overnight travel, and you can focus on getting the field experience that you need. Right now, we're doing quite a bit of work with NRCS on the nationwide conservation planning certification, as well as meeting continuing education requirements as well. So if you go to our website, conservationprotraining.org, one of the things you'll find there is our calendar of events. And what I tell folks is this should be the place that you go for 2 reasons. One is to see what's coming up here. But the second thing is, if you're looking at scheduling some type of event in your county for farmers or for your colleagues, you can quickly go here as we get it populated and make sure you're not conflicting with something that's in the next county over. And so I really see the training calendar as having 2 primary benefits, one being so you can find things that are of interest to you around Wisconsin, but secondly, avoiding some of those scheduling conflicting things as well. Another thing that you'll find on the website is the Training Resources tab. For those that have taken training with us since 2003, you can make a request to get your training record. So if you're going for conservation planning certification for NRCS, if you've taken any courses with us and need a certificate, you can get those. There's information on the State Interagency Training Committee, SITCOM, that you can get there as well. And obviously, if you've got a training need, something that you see is out there, we're more than happy to look at putting something together that will meet that particular need. There's also a button at the black bar at the bottom of our website to sign up for our newsletter. We usually only send that out 3 or 4 times a year when we have training of our own coming up. Rather than to plug up everybody's inboxes, we tend to really focus it around some of the new and innovative offerings that we're putting forth out there. So I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that we are working with NRCS. Ag-Learn courses tend to have a reputation of being very dry and boring. We are trying to break that mold and are one of only a couple of folks outside of NRCS actively developing Ag-Learn courses currently. One of the ones that's out there right now that we've developed within the last couple of years is delivering effective blended training to conservationists. So if you've been asked to help do something as a webinar or online, this will basically walk you through, hey, here's how you decide what gets in the field, what gets on the online portion, how do you make sure that you're not just putting your PowerPoint slides on there, how do you make it active and engaging. We also have in Ag-Learn now a new course on ecological site descriptions. For those that are working with conservation compliance, there's a new course, Fundamentals of Highly Erodible Land, HELC, Wetland Conservation Provisions of the Farm Bill. Rangeland Health Assessment, which really doesn't pertain too much to Wisconsin, but we did have some significant Wisconsin input into putting that together. There's also a brand new one on using basic soil survey information and how to use web soil survey, and using WinPST, which is the Windows pesticide screening tool, particularly for those in sandy areas, the vegetable production. That one should be out on Ag-Learn by the end of the month. Within Wisconsin, we do quite a bit on soil health. So there's 4 online courses that are free that are anywhere from 2 to 4 hours apiece. There's an introduction to soil health, cover crops, understanding soil moisture management, and soil health management systems. Send me an email if you're interested in any one of those. We're in the process of looking at moving our in-field soil health training to a virtual field day for later this summer. And one of the things that we do across the state with some DNR funding is actually soil health training for farmers, where we give them a soil compaction probe. We give them a soil health kit, train them how to use it, and then have a system set up to where they are working with their landlords, if they're renting land, to start that conservation or that conservation conversation And that's really built around soil health and has been very, very successful. And so if you've got an interest in that, please reach out to me as well. For those of you that are working in the areas of nutrient management or ground or surface water quality concerns, we have manure applicator training for farmers and for-hire applicators that we offer in about a half a dozen locations around the state every spring. We now have an entirely online version of that, but we also recorded the live sessions this year, and we have both an English and a Spanish version. The handouts, the workbooks on setbacks are available in Spanish as well. And so if you've got landowners that have Spanish-speaking employees, we're more than happy to make that available to them as well. The online materials are really designed for the folks in rural Wisconsin. Low bandwidth, being viewed on a mobile device, really talks about manure spill response, regulations, and neighbor relations. So before I close here, I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about a specific project ongoing right now. We have every 5 years, we hire a college student that goes through all of the county records we can, DNR records, really looking at the root causes of manure runoff, manure spills, and that guides our educational approach for the next 5 years. The student is doing that this year, but we are still needing county records of what you've got for manure spills. We've got about 400 or so that we've gone through, and there's probably another 50 or 60 that are out there. But if your county does have records on manure spills for the last 5 years, definitely want to talk with you about how we can get that worked into the database, because the more information we have on those root causes, the better off we're going to be in terms of being able to educate people to prevent problems from happening. With that, Penny, that is the super quick version of going through things here.
Thanks, Kevin. I don't know, we haven't had a whole lot of questions, so I think that's probably about it. Thanks, Kevin.
Yep, no problem. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.